fellow Toastmasters and most welcome guests. Have you ever had that feeling that you don't make a difference in this world? I get that feeling sometimes, and when I do, I start to think about these three stories I'm about to tell you. The first story involved a very dear friend of mine that I had met many, many years ago. She was married and had two children, and she worked with me at the company I worked for. She went on mat leave at the same time as I got laid off, and we struck up a friendship. We became friends, and I would go over to her place every couple of months and have a coffee with her. And that went on until I moved to Brampton. When I moved to Brampton, every time I'd go to London to visit my parents, I'd always stop by and say hello to Mary Lou. But after a few years, she passed away. Her husband had called me and told me she had passed away of a lung disease that she had developed. I felt sad, so I drove to London to her funeral. And after the funeral, her husband had introduced me to her parents, who had never met. And the first words out of her mother's mouth was, "Thank you for being such a good friend to Mary Lou." And at that moment, I realized how much of a difference I made in her life. Now, this second story involved my wife. We had met in 2003 on an online dating service. She lived in Walkerton and I lived here in Brampton. Every summer, or during that summer, every weekend, I would drive to Walkerton to spend the weekend with her. And we did that all summer until the fall. We decided that we were going to move in together. She would move up to Brampton, and we would live common law. We lived 10 happy, wonderful years together. We shared our trips, we shared our lives. Even though we never got married and we never took the vows in sickness and in health, in my heart, I had taken them vows. So in 2011, she got diagnosed with breast cancer and she got sick. Well, I looked after her while she was sick. I would help. She had gotten bedridden at one point, and I'd help her up out of bed, or I would go and make her meals for her, help her get dressed, that kind of thing. But unfortunately, cancer got to her, and she passed away in August 2013. After the funeral was over, her brother come up to me and he said, "Thank you for looking after my sister." And I thought that was a weird thing to say. Of course, I'd looked after her. But then it was at that moment that I realized that I made a difference in her life. Now, the third story involves my granddaughters up in Moosonee. They had asked me to come up for their graduation from high school. And the one granddaughter was graduating from high school 2 years ago, at the same time as my other stepson was getting married in Mexico. And I couldn't afford to do both. So I ended up going to Mexico instead of her graduation, or at least that's what I thought. But before she actually graduated, her father come up to me and said, "Okay, we'll help you out financially if you'll come up, but we want to surprise her." So we did that. And when I got up there, I was met up with abundance amount of tears and joy that I had come up to watch her graduate from high school. So the moral of my story is, if you think that you do not make a difference out there, I'm sure each and every one of yous have a story that would tell you differently. Mr. Clement, Chair.